Welcome to another episode of How to Adult with Travis Walker. Today I brought on my high school English teacher, of course, to talk about adoption. She's had an incredible journey adopting two amazing kids, and we need to learn about the adoption process. So many people think about it, so many people dream about it. Some people are just thrown into it, and they need to know, what is the process like? What are the feelings? What are the emotions? What are the steps? And today me and Megan talk all about all the steps, all of the emotions. It's an incredible episode. I learned so much, so I'm really thankful that Megan came on the show. Make sure that you go and follow the podcast at How to Adult TW on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And as always, y'all, please share the episode everywhere that you are on the social media. I will do the same. I will make the post easy for you to share. With all that being said, y'all, it's time to learn how to adult. All right, here we are, another episode with Megan. Am I allowed to call you Megan? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. I had to ask because Megan is a former teacher of mine, and she's coming on to talk about something really, really interesting, which is adoption. It's such an important topic. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, definitely. I'm so glad to be here.
Awesome. So I'd like to know kind of a little bit more about you so the listeners can get to know you a little bit better. But what's your location and what do you do for work?
We live in a small town, Sour Lake, Texas, and I am a high school English teacher. I teach grades 11 and 12, and this is my either 12th or 13th year, and I very much enjoy it. I'll probably do it for many more years as long as I have it in me. So
there you go. God bless you. God bless. I just left the classroom, so absolutely, that's amazing. Well, awesome. So we're here to talk about adoption. So I'd like to just kind of hand it over to you and just kind of ask, where does your journey with adoption begin? And kind of how did you decide that adoption was the route and the path for you and your husband?
Sure. Well, honestly, I really think that God has been preparing my heart my entire life because I have always had an interest in adoption.
Right.
Always. I mean, I remember being a kid talking to my parents about one day, wouldn't that be so cool to adopt a baby, or even like foster to adopt, or just that concept in general, just giving a child a home. And then not just that, but fulfilling that need within yourself, that you could be that person to do that for somebody. And then also, I mean, my husband and I, we've been together since we were 16. So
Wow.
I remember we were just young, dumb teenagers, falling in love, planning our life. And I remember we had conversations from that young about, oh my gosh, when we grow up and we get married, we're going to adopt a baby. So, I mean, I just truly feel like God has been planting that seed my entire life. And, little did we know that's exactly where we would eventually end up. And thank God we did, because it's been such an utter blessing to us. We very much struggled when it came to starting a family. We had 4 unexplained first trimester miscarriages. Wow. Each one, just as devastating as the last. We sought out answers from 2 different fertility specialists to try to discover the cause. Why is this happening with this recurrent miscarriage? And after that, I went through all kind of different medical procedures to assess, what type of status I had in terms of my reproductive functioning. And it came down to 2 different fertility specialists saying, listen, we have ran every single test and we cannot find anything wrong with either one of you. We do not know why this is happening. And so, it was just frustration. There was anger. There was everybody in my life. It felt like at that time when we were just so desperately wanting to start our family, everybody was having babies, and I was going to all these baby showers, and you're so excited for everyone around you. But then I don't want to say jealousy, but the truth of it, I'm not jealous for you, but I'm jealous because you have the thing that I want and it's just not working out.
Right.
And, at that point, we started just kind of discussing, where do we want to go from here? And one of our options, we could have gone the IVF route, and, done the surgery and all that.
Right.
Or we could have done adoption. And so we kind of just started having conversations to see, how do we feel about everything? We started meeting with doctors just to see what that would entail. We also sought out other people that had adopted just through various routes, whether it was foster care, agency, or, whatever it happened to be. And we, at that point, just really began praying about it and considering adoption. And that's kind of when we started researching all of our options. And, we very easily could have went the IVF route, but I just had this feeling in my heart that if it were meant to be, it would have already worked out.
Right.
And to take that much of a monetary gamble, because I had no problem getting pregnant, I had a problem staying pregnant.
Sure.
And so it just, to me, it didn't matter. And, it really just came down to the fact that we just wanted a baby and biology didn't really matter. And so we just kind of started praying about it. And once we started researching out our options, it is very overwhelming at first because, I mean, you have open adoption, closed adoption, domestic, international, private agency, foster to adopt. There's just so many options.
Yeah.
And I feel like God just very much narrowed our path and led us exactly where we were supposed to be, to our agency, New Life Adoptions in Tomball, Texas. I do have permission to say that. I did seek out
Good.
if that, and they said yes. And I just felt like, it was a Christian agency that was very much aligned with our beliefs, and that's just kind of where we went, and that's kind of how our journey got started. And yeah, that's kind of what led us to it.
That's an incredible story, people don't really know how hard it is for other people to start their family. I personally didn't know until we had our own struggle, and in postpartum now we know so many people that have had so many problems, and it's really frustrating when you're in the moment of having problems. When my wife said it on her episode 24, of just how frustrating it was when we were fighting through PCOS. And so that's really interesting, and I definitely can connect to the frustration of that time period for sure. But super interesting story. So you mentioned agency. I guess agency was the route that you went, and so I'd like to kind of talk about what is the agency route? What does that look like? How do they just partner you with the child, or do they walk you through the whole thing? What is that?
So whenever we decided an agency, everybody's different. It really just kind of depends on where you're at in life and like what you're willing to do or how far you're able to go. But like when we started researching it out, domestic, international, there's just so many other types of red tape that you have to cut through, and the waiting period is a lot longer. Foster to adopt, the fact that we were just ready now and we didn't want to have to wait, and it was just with how much we wanted a baby, the fear of that child could have to go back, and right. We might not be able to keep them. I couldn't allow myself to do that then. Now I do think now that I've been through the process, we would definitely be able to do that now, but it just, at that time in life, we just were not able to. But in our case, we just honestly got on Google and we started kind of researching. And then I actually had a coworker that started, we had decided in, I want to say like March or April, that we were going to, go through the adoption process, and we had been researching it out. And somebody moved into our district, taught a different subject than I did. Yeah. And she was just randomly placed on our hallway. She shouldn't have been, but it just happened to be an open classroom. And she had actually adopted 2 children through New Life as well.
Wow.
And it was just, when I say God literally moved mountains and put everything into place, I mean, yeah. And that's how we ended up finding our agency, through Google, which I had already Googled that particular agency and I already knew a little bit about it. And then when I started talking to her, she kind of gave me their side and their story and how everything went with them. And so that's what led us to our decision to actually use our particular agency.
Yeah. So what kind of services do agencies provide in the adoption industry?
So ours took care of everything. I mean, they are incredible in terms of preparing you for what it's going to be like. I mean, they pre-train you after placement. They walk you through. You have meetings on a monthly basis where you have to check in. They facilitate meetings between, or in our case, because we sought out an open adoption, they facilitate meetings between birth families and you, where you can go to their facility, feel comfortable. You have the social worker there in an environment where it's just more comfortable for everybody. Mm-hmm. And people that are experienced and emotions and all that, so they kind of know what to expect. But they handled everything. I mean, they kind of walked us through the process on what to expect, how to start, what do you need to do. They gave us a list of all the to-dos, which is extremely I guess you would say lengthy, because it's not necessarily a hard process, but It's very time consuming. There is a lot of red tape to cut through. There's a lot of prayer, commitment, patience, resilience, oftentimes unexpected heartbreak that goes into it. And our agency, we just feel like they very much prepared us for all of the what ifs. And then in terms of the legal aspects of everything, we knew what to expect ahead of time. They, anticipated, okay, if this happens, then here's what you need to do. Or if this happens, then here's what you need to do. So, it was very, very organized and there were no surprises with our agency.
Right. Right. That's very interesting. I can see the value in that as well. So you threw out a few terms earlier of open and closed adoption. I'd like to dive into those two specifically. Can you kind of explain the difference in those two options?
Yeah, absolutely. So closed adoption is honestly kind of a thing of the past. Closed adoption basically just means that the birth mother or birth parents, they legally sign their rights away. Or in some cases, like if it's a foster to adopt situation where the child has been removed, then the judge will terminate the parents' rights, like if they're not able to care for their child. And at that point, there is no contact. And in a real deal closed adoptions, even the records could be sealed. And it's really a thing of the past from like a long time ago when adoption had a stigma. And you didn't tell your kids that they were adopted and all of that. You just led them to believe this lie their whole life. Whereas open adoption is really what you want it to be. And there are certain standards, but for the most part, it's as open as the adoptive parents want from a certain degree. So like our agency requires that for 6 months after placement, adoptive families are to write the birth mother, or if they have both parents involved, birth mother a letter every single month. Just give them an update on the child. We fill out a little form on their milestones and how they're doing, and then just talk about whatever you want to talk about and get to know them and get very close to them. And then on top of that, each month you also include 10 pictures. The birth mother, at least for our agency, was not allowed to see our children for 6 months. Really, it was until after finalization. And the reason for that is just because, from her perspective, it's emotional, and it's so emotional. I cannot even imagine having to make the decision that our birth moms made for the betterment of their children.
Right.
It's so selfless. It's so brave. We're talking, very young women that they were in a situation where they could have chosen the alternative, and they chose to carry children knowing that they were going to have to place them with another family. To me, that was the ultimate.
That's a tough decision. Yeah.
And it's so very much out of love. So anyway, at finalization, after that, then they can, if the parents are comfortable, the adopted parents, you can kind of branch out through your agency and start making contact, whether you want to do by phone, you just want to maintain letters where, like we would send the letters and packages to the agency, and then they would forward them on if you don't want them to have your address or anything like that. And then twice a year, our agency recommends that you meet with your birth family in person as much as you can. So usually they like you to do it around Christmas and then around whenever your child's birthday is, or maybe Mother's Day, or any specific holiday that you're able to.
Yeah, that's interesting. So kind of how did you make your choices with your kids, or what does it look like for you specifically in those kind of things that you touched on?
So our situation with our birth parents, they are, I guess you would say they're ever evolving. For my daughter, who was born first, so my children, it's 2 separate adoptions, separate birth families and everything. So
okay.
For my daughter, it was a little bit different. For the first 6 months, we sent letters and pictures and all of that to our agency, and then they would deliver them to our birth mom. And she, a couple of times, sent back letters and pictures. And then at about 4 months, we stopped kind of hearing from her. And so we were worried because we were like, what's going on? How is she doing? Like I said, it's a very emotional, grieving process for her. I could only imagine. So I'm sure that seeing those pictures, it's hard. It's hard to know that somebody else, obviously I'm imagining, but it's hard to know that somebody else is parenting your child, and that when you so desperately wish that you could have. And so when Addie, and then we didn't hear from her from about 4 months old until Addie turned about I want to say little over 2.5.
Wow.
And then she just randomly out of the blue texted me one day. And then we started talking all the time. And then we decided, okay, we're gonna meet back up. And she wanted to see her. And so we drove all the way 5 hours away to where she was living at that time. And we had an amazing weekend with her. And she just really opened her heart and told us, this is the place I was at. I was having a really hard time emotionally dealing with it. And I didn't want to walk back into her life until I knew that I could, or I thought that I could.
Right.
And so for her, we just kind of let her be as open as she wanted to, and just let her know that, hey, we are here, whenever you're ready. If you just want to do pictures and letters, that's fine. If you want to meet in person, that's fine. But we will come to you. You can come to us. Whatever you're feeling, we'll make that work, because we very much respect where you're at, and that healing process, it takes time.
Right.
And so we have maintained contact with her, through since then, the 2.5 year, and Addie's now 5.5.
Wow.
And so sometimes it's through text messages, sometimes it's phone calls, sometimes we FaceTime. And then a couple of times whenever she's visited, I mean, we're to the point now to where we feel so comfortable with her that when she comes in for a visit, I mean, she stays at our house now. I mean, she is very much like family to us. We are comfortable in every way. There's a great fear that with open adoption, they're going to try to take your child away, or they're going to try to take the parent role. And it's just not. I mean, number one, the birth parents actively made a decision to place their child in a home that could provide something that they were not able to. Number two, from a legal perspective, I mean, legally it would be kidnapping if they tried to take our children. I mean, like, it wouldn't happen. And I think that's just the crazy fear that people have. Now my son, his birth mom his whole situation was a little bit different. We still don't really know all the pieces that there are to know, but his birth mom she kind of likes to be a little more distant. She likes pictures. She likes letters. We really only communicate with her through like text messages or through maybe Facebook Messenger or something like that.
Yeah.
And we don't really hear from her as often, but I think everybody has a different way of handling it. Whereas Addie's birth mom, seeing her was very healing in person. But for his birth mom, I think the more that she receives the pictures and letters, it kind of just rips that wound open again. And so we just kind of did the same thing. We let her know that we want to be as open as you want to be. And if this is where you're at, that's fine. And we can respect that. If you want us to stop, we can stop sending pictures and letters. But she did say, I do like hearing from you, but it might take me a while to get further than that. And so that's just kind of where we are with her. We have only met her one time, and it was the day before we brought my son home from the hospital. So he was about a month old.
Wow. That's really interesting, like just like the different ways that things can work out. And so I can definitely tell that all of this is very emotional. It's very emotional for really everybody. So we've talked about kind of birth parents' emotions, but what's it like for you and your husband emotionally in that transition from before adoption to after adoption?
Well, to some degree, I think that a transition period, just first-time parents, you're all over the place.
Yes.
Because a lot of things are similar, whether it's biological or adoption. I mean, there's the desire to start a family, and then once you're in the waiting period, you wait forever, and then finally the big day arrives. And I mean, you just don't know what you don't know until you're right in the middle of it, trying to very stressfully figure it out. So, the exhaustion, the sleep deprivation, worrying whether you're doing everything right, cuddles, rocking, feeding, changing, all of that. I mean, it just takes a while to learn. But I do think that, not that the goal is not there when you have biological children, but I think the goal with adoption is you have to form a solid bond with that baby, and it has to be immediate. There's no time delay. As soon as you get that child, you have to be very proactive in really forming that bond. And there are many studies, like scientific books and everything, that have been written saying that, even at the newborn stage, there's a grieving process for that child. There is some sense, whether they obviously they don't understand everything, but there is some sense of loss for that baby. The smells are different, the sounds are different from inside the womb. They heard their mother's voice, and then when they get out, it's not what they anticipated,
Right.
so I mean, mostly they don't understand everything, but there is a loss, and so that bond has to be built. And I didn't have the opportunity to grow my babies in my womb and feel them move and go to those appointments and all of that. So I feel like to some degree adoptive parents have to work extra hard to make sure that their babies understand that connection, that I am your mom and you can trust me to meet your needs even from the infant stage. One of our, which I really appreciate, it was a little bit stressful when we first started, but one of our agency requirements, and it's not like this with every agency, but it was particular with ours, is that one of the adopted parents has to be a stay-at-home parent for at least 6 months,
Wow.
which is absolutely crazy because you're like, I'm just bringing a child home and I have to provide for it. And so how are we going to do that? And again, God just kind of worked out all the details. Luckily, I have an amazing, amazing boss at Hardin Jefferson. Shout out to Patrick Brown. He was very supportive throughout everything, never questioned it. And he was like, yes, you do what you need to do for your family. And so I thankfully was able to take 6 months off with each one of my children and still have a job to come home or to come back to whenever that 6 months period was up. But I will say that, every child in terms of bonding, it's totally different. And for my daughter, I mean, from the moment we brought her home from the hospital, she was 3 days old and she bonded with me instantly in literally every single way. I was her world. She wanted me. She didn't want me to put her down. She didn't want me to be out of her sight. And I mean, it was like everything that I imagined it would be. I mean, it was amazing, especially for wanting a baby so bad. And like my love language is like giving love to other people. And that is 100% her love language as well. I mean, she wants to be attached to my hip at all times. And it was exactly
Right.
what I did. But then, my son, he came into the world very premature. He was over 2 months premature. He was in the NICU for a month. And so we didn't even find out that he was alive, or because we weren't working with his birth mom ahead of time. It was just like, hey, this child is born and this birth mom has picked you. And also you can come meet him today. And he
Wow.
was already 15 days old. And so, yeah, and he was very premature. His birth mother, just due to circumstances, was not able to be at the hospital with him until we got there. She was there for like the first, I don't remember exactly how many days, like the first week or so. And then it was just really kind of left up to the nurses and then our agency, the transition period where our agency was taking custody of the child and everything. And so he missed a lot of that one-on-one contact. And I truly think that it really did something in terms of his trust factor and his ability to bond, because when we brought him home, it's like he was the total opposite of my daughter. He didn't want to be held, or not often. He had no problem being put down. He would almost kind of seem to just like push us away, which is so weird for a newborn because you would think their internal desire is hold me.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
he just wasn't. And it was, I mean, it hurt my heart. It hurt my heart a lot. And so we had to, aside from overcoming all of his medical obstacles, I mean, I was trying to figure out what can I do? Like, am I not doing something right? I mean, I sought out our social workers from our agency and got advice from them. I talked to our pediatrician. Our pediatrician referred us to an early intervention specialist. Again, shout out to Susan Hudson, who is absolutely amazing. And just after about 4 months of just consistent, not giving up, taking all the advice that we could from all the other professionals, continuing to love on him, and just every single time he cried, go to him, meet whatever need that was. I mean, just every single time, no delay. About 4 months, he finally was just like, oh, okay, you must be my mom. And then it was instant like that. I mean, just like my daughter. And now, I mean, you would never know that was a concern. He is such a mama's boy. Such a mama's boy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They're adorable as well. So you mentioned earlier that the difficulty of adopting in the United States. I kind of would like to talk about the difficulty and the length of time. You mentioned waiting periods a few times as well. So yeah, let's address the difficulty and the length of time for adoption.
Sure. So some of the length of time is just you have to get all of your stuff out of the way in terms of like the state's requirements. With our daughter, they told us once you start the process, expect the wait time to be, or really with both of our children, expect the wait time to be 6 months to a year. We waited, I want to say about 9 months to get our daughter. And when our daughter turned a year old, we started the process again, thinking, okay, there'll be like a 2-year span between them. And then shockingly, there wasn't. We got our son a lot faster than we anticipated, and we only waited about 6 months with him. I
Oh
mean,
my
we
gosh.
we were not even done with all of our agency requirements, so that was some of the delay on how quickly we could bring him home, was because we had to finish some of those things really, really, really fast. So like our
Yeah.
home study, we hadn't even completed our home study yet. So our social worker was like, okay, we're coming out tomorrow. Let's do this. So we just, yeah.
So the time can be a little bit different, and so you talked a little bit about, the different steps that it takes, and are those steps particularly hard, or are they just tedious? Kind of, is there somewhere in between tedious and hard? Where is it?
Yeah, I mean, the process itself is not hard. Honestly, it's a lot. I mean, it's a commitment. You have to know you're putting yourself out there emotionally. You're putting every personal, finance, background check, fingerprinting, anything personal you could possibly ever have or do. The agency is going to want to know to make sure that you are fully prepared. They are going to come to your home, make sure that your home is prepared for a child. They'll give you all the counseling you need, and like if you have anything you need to fix. So like for example, we have a pool at our house, and we had a fence, but our gate was not, it wasn't completely broken, but it needed some repairs. And
Yeah.
so they would not pass us on the home study until we had gotten our pool gate fixed. Understandable. We're bringing a child into the home. We need to
Yeah.
have it fixed. So it was just things like that. And it is time consuming. Our agency, like, I really feel like they overly prepared us, but not in a bad way. I mean, by the time we got our child, there was nothing that we really didn't see coming, because we felt so secure in all the training that they gave us. So we had to go to 2 different seminars through our agency, in which they walked us through, okay, this is what it's going to look like in terms of, here's the process, here's kind of like a tentative timeline, here is how it's going to work with meeting or being paired with birth families. We decided like how exactly we were going to do that, like make a hospital plan contingent upon our birth mother and how they were doing. By the way, all of that flew out of the window because our kids were already born by the time we got notified, just because of circumstances, but that were out of our control. But I mean, everything. So like some of the requirements that we had to do, one was we had to fill out an infant questionnaire, which it sounds harsh, but it is necessary. So basically what you do is the agency gives you a form to fill out, and it's pretty extensive, and it just goes through what type of child are you willing to accept. And I mean, it goes from, like if the child is born with any sort of medically correctable thing, and it like lists all the different possibilities, and you have to go through each one and say, okay, I will accept this or I won't accept this. What if the baby is born exposed to these types of drugs? What if it was in first trimester, second trimester, third trimester? Alcoholism. It gives you like a background of medical history type of information. Like what if there was bipolar, schizophrenia, depression in the birth parent's history? Are you willing to accept a child like that? It goes through, I mean, it's very, very, very extensive. It asks for gender. I'm sorry, it doesn't ask for gender, because some birth moms don't want to know what they're having, or they want to be surprised, or,
Right.
So that you can't pick. But I mean, it asks race, it asks ethnicity. Are you willing to accept multiples? Are you willing to accept a child with like mental disabilities, or I mean, it's on and on and on. And so that was the first step. We had to make a profile book that basically just showcased our life and who we are, and like our home and what it looks like, with pictures of us and all of that. When it comes to paperwork, aside from the screening application that you initially send in and the infant acceptance questionnaire, you have to give proof of your identity in literally every format that you could ever imagine.
Right.
Driver's license, birth certificate, social security, passports, marriage license. You have to prove proof of finances with all of your bank documents. You have to submit tax returns from the past, I don't know if it's 3 years, 5 years, something like that. Credit checks. You have to go through extensive background checks. You have to get letters of recommendations from different types of people. Like I think one could be a family member, a friend. We had to get one from our pastor.
Wow.
You have to have medical screenings to make sure that there's nothing terminal or anything serious to where if we're bringing this kid home, they're going to have two parents or the anticipation of two parents. We had to write, because we went through a Christian agency, proclamation of faith statements, just so our birth mothers know this is how we feel from a moral standpoint, and we could align that with how they felt. We had to write letters to our potential birth mothers stating how we felt about them and the situation. And this was before we even knew who our birth mothers were going to be. Just how did we see the woman that was going to be providing this life for us, this child, and what an act and sacrifice that was. And then we just had to get the basics that you would have to do in your home study, which means a fire inspection, environmental health inspection. We have to provide proof of that our pets were vaccinated. And then we have to also do a whole bunch of required reading through our agency and write these short little book reports on them. So paperwork wise, it was just a lot of stuff that you had to check off, but you have 6 months to do it in. So it's not like they give you this packet and it's all due in like tomorrow. So we had plenty of time.
Yeah, that's really helpful to kind of just know the different steps that people have to take. Really interesting. Yeah, they just threw us out the door. Let me said good luck. It'll be fine. Oh my gosh.
Well, and that part of the adoption process is filtering through that frustration, because I can't tell you how many times my husband and I felt overwhelmed by the process, because biological parents, they just show up and they have a baby and then they go home. But we had to jump through so many different so many to prove that we are worthy people that can raise this child. I mean, and we also had to take like an infant care class and get CPR certified. I mean, it was tedious at times, but also thank God that the state of Texas does do this, because
worth it.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, like I said, we were so very prepared to bring this child home.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about this next question before the show, just so that we kind of were on the same page about it. You have some amazing resources to this question. But, when people think about adoption, they think about cost as well. And so, process and time is part of it, but cost is part of it as well. And so what is your thought process around the cost of adoption?
So, I mean, anytime you look at adoption, money is going to come up, finances are going to come up. And depending on which route you go through, it could be more or less. But I would say that there is room for everybody. Don't ever, ever, ever let finances hold you back. Every single person could do it if they wanted to. Things that people don't know is that there are so many grants. People want to give you money to adopt a child. If you don't qualify for the grants, because some of them are contingent upon like how much you make, in terms of how much you bring home a year, then there are so many adoption loans that people don't know about, and they give you a ridiculous amount of time to pay them off. And the annual, I mean, it's like very low fees. There are also, like, my husband worked at a company that contributed to adoption.
Wow.
So and everything helps. And luckily for him, I mean, it was a very good amount. Also, if you adopt a child, once you finalize, now obviously you have to pay for it ahead of time, but once you finalize, there is an adoption tax credit. And as of 2022 finalizations, you get $14,890 back. Again, that is $14,890 back. So yeah, depending on what route you go, you are going to spend money, but again, there are so many resources. There's so many resources. Also, what people don't know is that oftentimes it is cheaper. Like if you're willing to accept a child that has special needs, like maybe they're born with Down syndrome or something like that, it is a lot cheaper to do that. Also, if you're willing to adopt multiples, like twins or triplets, it's often cheaper because the anticipated cost of raising more babies is going to be more. So the price is lower going through a private agency. Whenever it comes to just the types of adoption, foster to adopt is definitely going to be, I would say, the least expensive. Sometimes you don't have to pay anything. Sometimes it's just court costs. And most of the time, well, I say most of the time, just based off of the friends that I have that have foster to adopt, most of the time those court fees are waived because it is through the foster care system.
Right.
So private adoption agencies like we used, when we started researching it out, to me, honestly, sometimes they can be a little bit shady. So some agencies work on a sliding scale fee. So the price that it would cost us would not be the same price that it would cost someone else. And that really, really bothered me because at the end of the day, our goal is the same.
Right.
And they wouldn't tell us what the price was going to be until we had went through all of their trainings and spent all of this time. And in the state of Texas, once you are with an agency, you cannot work with another one. So
Oh,
like you're bound to that one. Yeah. And so we were like, well, I'm not going to commit to you not knowing what this is going to cost because I need to know up front, like how much do I need to be saving and do I
right.
need to be applying for these grants and loans and all of that. And so we did not use that agency. That is why we went with New Life in Tomball, Texas, because everything was upfront from the get-go. Once you send your initial application in, they give you every single thing. They give you a timeline of payments. They give you pages and pages and pages of resources. They give you information on how to fundraise through, maybe GoFundMe or other options. They generate t-shirt sales if that's the route you want to go, or any kind of, fundraiser like that.
Yeah.
They get pages of different grants. I want to say it was when we were adopting our daughter, there was another couple who the wife was a stay-at-home mom and the husband was, I want to say he was a school teacher or a preacher. He could have been a preacher. It was one of the two. So clearly don't make a lot of money teaching,
Yeah.
but I know from personal experience, but they were able to fill out a grant that some church was offering, and the church paid, and it wasn't even their church, but the church paid 100% of their adoption fees.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's what I'm saying. People just don't ever think that finances can stand in your way because that should never be a factor. There are so many resources out there. And then once you pick an agency, like again, we picked New Life because we knew upfront what everything was going to be. If you don't choose an agency route, you could also do a private adoption. And I know a few people that have done it this way, where it's like somebody knows somebody that's had a child and for whatever reason they're not able to parent, and they found maybe like a friend of the family or a friend of a friend that they want to place their child with. And really that's just finding a lawyer, getting the lawyer to draw up all the paperwork, and then going before the judge. So you really just have to pay the lawyer and the court costs. So it's kind of, typically it's very limited in a private adoption like that in terms
Right.
of cost. Where you're going to spend the most money would be a private agency or an international adoption.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very, very helpful. So if you want to do it, you can do it. That's an amazing message because I think people are held back by that piece. Let's see.
Well, and I think sometimes too, people get caught up in like, why do I have to pay this money to an agency? Like I just want a child. It shouldn't cost that much. But if you only knew the things that the agency is doing behind the scenes, because they are providing all kind of services to the birth families. So like, the mother and the father in terms of counseling, grief counseling, preparing them for the birth. They go as far to schedule and take them to their medical appointments to make sure that they are getting their prenatal care. They will provide transportation. They will pay bus fares. They will go with you and hold your hand if so. They pay for prenatal classes for them.
Wow.
They provide pre and post adoption counseling free of charge for them. So if ever something comes up, they can go and they can get, the mental, how do I deal with this? Like, where am I going to go from here? They provide parenting classes. If you decide, adoption is not for me, and I think I'm going to keep my child, they do that for you. They help pay for housing and for food and give you legal representation or legal resources if you need that. They also accrue a lot of travel and lodging expenses, going to visit all different birth mothers and coming to visit our homes, like the adoptive parents' homes, and conduct these home studies. They put on these amazing seminars that make adoptive parents ready for when their child comes home,
right.
and also what to do. They have all of these outreach programs for birth mothers or potential birth mothers, or, hey, I'm pregnant and I don't know where to go from here. They go to jails, they go to women's shelters, they go to high schools. I mean, like, you name it, they're going everywhere all the time. So it's not just like, okay, I'm paying these people, now what? I mean, that money is legitimately going to very worthy causes when you're paying an agency to work for you. or at
Wow.
least ours did.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so encouraging that they're, being good stewards of the money that people are paying, whether it's actually the adoptive parents or some grant or some fund. We love great stewarding of money. It's really important. Um,
And
Go ahead.
and one thing I also love about our agency too, like I said, it's a Christian agency. So in the process, they're also leading people to Jesus, which I think is absolutely amazing, and when they're going to all these places and working with these women, I mean, these women are feeling like they're at the lowest of low, like where do I go from here and how do I recover? And they're not in the baby stealing business. If adoption is not right for you, then they will make a plan for you to parent. And how are we going to do this? Let's work out a budget. Let's work on housing. Let's get this figured out. So it's not just like, hey, we want your baby. It's okay, if this is right for you, let's do this. And if it's not, okay, then let's make a plan for that. So I really love that too, because I
Yeah.
do feel like not only are they leading you to Jesus, but they're also being, the hands and feet of Jesus as well.
That's so encouraging and such a thing to celebrate. So I'm glad you use them by name because they deserve all the praise that you're giving them. So my next question is: do you feel like your experience with raising your children is any different? You've done it for what 5-6 years now, right?
Mhm.
And so you've got some experience here. Do you feel like your experience is any different than a birth?
Honestly, parenting is parenting regardless. Little girls are still sassy with their mamas. Little boys are, mama's boys. And I think to some degree, there are no differences in that. I mean, my kids are my kids. I know I did not give life to them, but let me tell you, I would take a bullet for them. I would die for them. I think of them as they are mine. I raise them as though I did give birth to them. And that is all they'll ever know. They will never see anything differently. I don't know any differently. I will say that raising a child, especially, our children are African American, and my husband and I are not. We are Caucasian. And so things are different in terms of cultural differences, not anything that is obviously noticeably, and because of, they're brown and we're not. But I
Yeah,
mean, we have had to learn to adjust. We have had to figure things out. One thing is African American hair care. I didn't know anything about that.
fair
And
enough.
I had to very much research. It is a priority. I don't ever want my kids to feel like they have a mother that doesn't know how to care for them. I mean, hair care is very important. I think from a cultural perspective, it's very important to keep those cultural ties. I want them to be enrolled in various activities where they see faces like theirs, they see children like them. And luckily for us, I'm telling you, God has just really worked amazing magic in our family and in our resources, because, for example, in my kids' pre-K classes, there are 3 other families like ours where we have kids that are different race that are adopted by different parents that do not look like them. So
Wow.
I think just experience wise, we just have to be more culturally aware that we have to prepare our kids differently. We have to learn things differently, and that's okay. I want them to feel connected to their heritage. I want them to feel connected to their birth families, and if they have questions, I want to be able to meet that need. I don't want to hide anything from them. I want them to feel like they can ask us anything and expect an honest answer. So, if mama don't know, I will figure it out and I will learn it. And I think that's just really the only difference. And
Yeah.
I don't even know that that's a difference. I feel like any parent would feel that way about their child.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. Absolutely. And I think I wanted to move into kind of a little section of the show about stigma because I think that there's a lot of stigma around adoption. You kind of mentioned the interracial adoption as well. And so maybe we can start there. Is there judgment or stigma about interracial adoption? And what's your philosophy on that specifically?
I would love to say no, but honestly, there is. I mean, I don't like to harp on the negative, but there have been many instances where I didn't even have words to respond because people just don't know what they don't know. And at
Right.
first I would just get raging mad, but then I realized, my sister-in-law told me one time, Megan, I think that at the heart of it, people genuinely have good intentions. I think sometimes their words just don't come out right.
Right.
And it really hit me and it hit my heart because I'm over here just getting mad. Like, how could you ask that? But then really, I mean, people that haven't been through this process, or they're not adopted or have adopted kids, they don't know, and they're just curious. And so we've really just tried to educate. So some of the things stigma wise that we have dealt with is we get a lot of people just want to bash their birth moms or their birth families and say, oh, well, they're just irresponsible, they're heartless, they just gave their babies away, they must just be crackheads, you know, or whatever. And I mean, it's not at all the case. I mean, these are beautiful, inside and out, precious women who were just put in such a hard spot. And I mean, they gave the ultimate gift of love. I mean, I cannot imagine that sacrifice that it took to carry a child knowing that you could not parent them, and then to go through profiles and pick a family that you thought was fit to give them a life that you couldn't. I mean, it's never okay to bash their parents. And I mean, they gave them everything that they could, and it may have only been a life, but they gave them everything that they possibly could in that moment. And that was their hope, and that was where their heart was at. And so it really upsets me when people want to bash their birth mom, not just theirs, but just in general, like the stigma of placing a child, because that is not always the case. And I think for most adoptions, they're like ours. That was a huge loving sacrifice that birth mom gave.
Right.
Also, you know, from their perspective, it's really disheartening when people say that, because I mean, that's very damaging to an adoptee. I mean, they are from their biological parents. So when you're disrespecting the biological parents, you're basically disrespecting that child, because they're internalizing that as, oh, well, something's wrong with me. And that's creating identity crisis and self-esteem issues. And it's not fair, and it's not at all right.
Yeah.
You know, another stigma that we've had to deal with is people think to some degree that adoption is easy, right? It's an open and closed case. You're their parents. But like, there's so much pain involved in adoption. You know, number one, especially if you were in our case, just mourning the loss of that dream. You know, we just, hey, we're going to have kids, it's going to work out. And then it didn't. You have to deal with that. That's not easy. And, you know, even though I had adopted children, to some degree, I had labor pains. I didn't physically give birth, but like, I was crying out to God. I was in pain from those miscarriages. I mean, I was begging God, I just want to be a mom. And I know it's a different type. And obviously labor is very extensive. I'm not saying that that's the same. I mean, to some degree, there is pain there. And then on top of that, you know, I witnessed two very strong women absolutely shatter in that moment where they granted us the privilege to be their child's parent. And you know, we cannot take that for granted. Adoption is not easy. There's not anything easy about that decision. And It's never a closed case.
Right.
Something else that really has irked me when people have said, you know, like adoption, or they've implied adoption is just second best. You know, biological children, well, that's number one, but adoption, that's just second best. You just took an alternative and you just, you know, we're trying to patch what you couldn't do. It really makes me mad, because, you know, like I hinted on earlier, we very easily could have gone the IVF route. We still could if we wanted to, but we didn't. I mean, to us, it all boiled down to, we just wanted a healthy baby. We didn't want to take a gamble on IVF when we knew that adoption could get us the family that we wanted. And in doing so, now we have extended family of their birth moms and their birth moms' families. And I mean, it's absolutely amazing.
Right.
It was not second best. One thing, stigma-wise, this is just kind of a personal thing for me that always bothers me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to see it when it's situations of foster to adopt. I feel like people ask too many questions in terms of the child's story. So like the outsiders looking in, they want to know everything of where did they come from, or what did their birth parents do? And oh my God, you know, and they would kind of want to almost be a gossipy type of manner about it.
Yeah.
But from an adoptive parent's perspective, guard that information with your life, because it is not their business. It is okay to say, you know what, that's their story, and I'm not going to share their story. Because can you imagine going somewhere, you know, when you're older and everybody knows everything about you and everything about your birth parents, and what if it's not good?
And all your
what
trauma.
If you in a place where, how traumatizing is that? I mean, recently, this has been in the past month or so, I was at the grocery store, And obviously my family looks a little bit different. So it was probably obvious that my kids were adopted. And a lady struck up a conversation with me and started telling me how they adopted their little baby. And she was going on and on and on about how her child was born addicted to everything and her birth mom. She was bashing her birth mom and all that. And in my mind, I'm just thinking, stop, please stop, please stop.
Please stop.
Because that is none of my business. And I didn't even ask for the information,
Right.
So it needs to be guarded. That is not your story to tell.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
People have often asked us as well, stigma wise, like, well, why don't you just have kids? Why don't you just have biological
Oh my
kids?
gosh.
And like, like I said, my husband and I have been together since we were 16. We got married at 21. We didn't even start trying to have kids until we were like 25, 26. And then we didn't actually get our daughter until we were almost 30. So by that point, we've been together for a really long time, like 14 years. I don't know. I'm an English teacher. I can't math
It
anymore,
sounds
but
right.
yeah, sure. It was a really long time. So in my mind, one, common sense would say, hey, there's probably something, going on.
Right.
Maybe I should ask that question. And then two, I don't know. I just feel like it's an inappropriate, personal, very insensitive thing to ask people.
Yeah, people just have very weird boundaries, and I really don't understand it. My wife told me the other day that there's actually stigma around C-sections, which Amber had a C-section, and that it was like the easy way out. And I'm like, well, I have very real babies crying in my arms right now, so we're very real parents. So it's just weird to me.
When I love that you just said that too, because that was actually one of my next points with being real. This one hurts my heart every time when people refer to their birth parents as their real parents. Well, what do you think about their real parents, or when are they going to visit their real parents? And I'm like, oh my goodness. I mean, that really stings, because to us, don't get me wrong, biology obviously played a very important role. Thank God that's who they are. I wouldn't want them to be anything different. But also, my husband and I are their real parents.
Right.
We changed all their very real diapers, fed them all their very real bottles, attended all of their very real recitals and games and all of that. So, I mean, yes, I understand, but it's just, again, the wording doesn't always come out right.
Right.
We've also had people say, well, why did you adopt kids that don't look like you? Or why did you adopt Black kids? And my husband, his favorite response is, I don't know, they were out of green ones. Like, what do you even say to that? Like, what am I supposed to say to that? Like, that doesn't even,
It's an odd question.
Yeah. And I mean, my husband, he had a coworker one time that asked him, how could you love a child that you didn't give birth to? To which my husband responded, hey, don't you have stepkids that you have raised since they were little?
Oh gosh, there we go.
And that just, yeah, and he was just completely dumbfounded and didn't know what to say, and just kind of got embarrassed. And the next day he came back and he apologized and was like, I'm really sorry. That was a really dumb question, and I never thought about it like that, but you were right, and I was out of line. But it's just these little teachable moments for people. And again, you don't know what you don't know, but I do think that it's people do have good intentions. It's
right.
Just the delivery of those questions, they're not always solid.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh. We've learned so much from you, but I want to close on a more positive note and ask you, what is the best thing or your most favorite thing about your journey being a mom?
I think my favorite thing is honestly just the fact that I can be. It is something that I do not take for granted. I like hearing my kids call me mom or mommy is the best thing that has ever happened to me. I think also I would very much advocate for open adoptions for everyone. It is not scary. You have to give a little bit with your heart. You have to put your emotions out there, but you gain so much in return. I mean, we have so much extended family now. We are also able to, these two women that we would have never otherwise known, we have completely different walks of life in literally every way. And we are able also to try to lead them to Christ, and they are able to kind of lean on us for support. They're obviously much younger than us. They were very young when they had their children. And I mean, it's just very, very much been all about love, coming together, learning from each other and just extending our family type of moment. So I think all of those things kind of wrapped up together would be my most favorite.
That's amazing. Well, you have a beautiful family. This was incredible. I've learned so much. If people have further questions, can they reach out to you? Is that something you're okay with?
Yes, absolutely.
Where can they find you?
I could maybe give my email address. Would that work?
That's perfect.
Awesome. So my personal email address is mparker316@gmail.com. And my name again is Meagan Parker.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Meagan. Please go ask all your questions. Also, go follow the podcast at How to Adult TW on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We will continue to learn how to adult together.